we just started climbing down into holes looking for people. And I remember being down under beams, the sunlight shining through, there's dust particles everywhere. And I do remember looking up outside the beams, and it was just so, I don't know, gothic. It was eerie. And right on a beam, sitting in a pile of probably inch-thick dust, was a driver's license of a woman. So I picked the driver's license up, and I look at her, and my heart went out to her. And I was just like, she's probably dead in here. And I honestly felt total love for her and remorse. And I held up the license, and I looked at her, and I said, we're going to find you, and I love you, and I will never forget you.
Welcome to The Lasting Mission, a podcast dedicated to sharing the powerful stories and experiences of veterans, their families, and supporters. Presented by Mission Roll Call, a nonpartisan movement providing veterans with a powerful, unified voice that is heard by our nation's leaders and communities. For information, visit missionrollcall.org.
I'm Britt Myers, today's host for the Lasting Mission podcast, and today we're here for a very special 9/11 episode with one of my favorite people, Ron Pastino. And Ron is an Army veteran and retired New York State police officer who spent much of his time in the days, weeks, and months after that horrific terrorist attack on our nation at Ground Zero, and doing rescue and relief efforts at the pile. So, Ron, we're just so thankful to have you here today for this special episode and to hear your perspective on the events of that day and the days after and the months, years, all the experiences, that have culminated since then. So thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. It's my honor and pleasure, especially to talk about 9/11.
Yeah, and let's jump in on that. So for those who might not know you or know of your story, just give me a background on your career, your professional experiences as a New York State police officer, and then you were also with SORT. But just give us an overview of what took you to 9/11 as a first responder that day.
Yep. So I got 30 years of government service, basically. I did 6 years in the Army, but always wanted to be a police officer. So I left the Army and joined the New York State Police, and had a very rewarding, emotional and tragic career, basically, all the above that comes with being a state trooper and in special operations. But so I ended up on the special operations response team after a few years as being a road trooper. And I did that the remaining part of my career for another 18 years. Once the first plane hit the towers on 9/11, I think we all felt like, goodness gracious, there was an accident by a pilot not paying attention. But then the second plane hit, and we all knew. Being, part of the tactical team for the state of New York, we also did rescues up in the Adirondack Mountains and in the Catskills and bridges and all that. So we knew immediately that it was terrorism, and half the team flew down in helicopters and half the team drove down. I was on the drive team. We went down thinking that we're going to rescue people, and ultimately went down there. It was the most, hard to explain scene. It was literally, you felt like you were in a movie scene of the amount of like dust and debris in the air. I drove across the George Washington Bridge, and there was 0 cars on it. I'd never seen, a road in New York City where there's no cars. Like it was eerie. And when we looked south crossing that bridge, we just saw the big, dust plume that would go up hundreds of feet in the air. And I was just awestruck by the whole event, driving into it and then driving into the dust cloud. It was hard to see down there. And, we weren't thinking about wearing masks and any health reasons from it. Especially I was in my late 20s at the time, so you're pretty gung-ho and you're not really thinking about side effects of dust and debris and all that. We immediately went down there just looking for work, tried to find a command post. We found the New York City Emergency Services Unit command post, which we did raids with and served warrants together, so we knew those folks anyway. And we partnered up with them and went onto the pile and started to look for people to save. And it was a very dangerous scene, hot. It was an 80 degree day on top of it. But looking down beneath the beams, there was fire, smoke, confusion. It was just, you'd hear jet fighters flying over. So it literally felt, it was, to take it all in, it took a while to digest, basically. It literally felt like you were in a war zone. Every part of your survival instinct was hyper alert, because we didn't know if there's going to be a secondary attack of an active shooter, some terrorists running around shooting the first responders at the pile. So we ended up setting security up around us. And then, the police department was doing that down there as well. We didn't find anybody to rescue. Unfortunately, we found, deceased people, a lot of evidence, a lot of, driver's licenses, a lot of shoes, just, really hard to explain and, digest.
You had shared that with me previously about when you got down to the pile, you said you looked up and just how immense it was. Talk to me a little about that and about when you started sifting through, when you realized it was not going to be a rescue effort, and really it was going to be recovery. And you had mentioned one particular ID that you saw and how you felt in that moment. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you remembered that, Brett. I remember, heck, I was probably on the pile maybe an hour, and I climbed down through beams. It was kind of hairy getting down there because I was like, I hope I don't slip and fall deeper, and how am I going to get out of here? They'll have to do a rescue on me. But, we just started climbing down into holes looking for people. And I remember being down under beams, the sunlight shining through, there's dust particles everywhere. And I do remember looking up outside the beams, and it was just so, I don't know, gothic. It was eerie. And right on a beam, sitting in a pile of probably inch-thick dust, was a driver's license of a woman. So I picked the driver's license up, and I look at her, and my heart went out to her. And I was just like, she's probably dead in here. And I honestly felt total love for her and remorse. And I held up the license, and I looked at her, and I said, we're going to find you, and I love you, and I will never forget you. And I will never forget her. She, perished, but the innocence is what bothered me the most. These people went in to just go to work, and live the American dream. And there were some foreign folks there as well, and they didn't deserve it either. And then not being able to pull anybody out alive really, bothered everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine that, because I think we all have our experience, and we've all been asked that question of where were you, on the morning of September 11th, and those memories are so poignant for us, and things that, like, I'll never forget where I was. And I just can't imagine being in that position that you were in and being actually at ground zero and seeing like the true implications of what that meant. Because when we all watched the towers fall, we knew, but there's something different about standing amidst that dust and debris and seeing like people's personal artifacts, or like you said, their shoes or their identification, and just realizing like these are real human beings. This isn't just, a horrible, horrific terrorist attack on us, but like the people died here today or are dying here today. And I think I just wonder about like the confusion down there that day. Cause like you said, the pile was immense. You had recalled thinking like, this is going to take years. How are we ever going to clear this? And I think that's something people might not understand either, unless you've looked at some of those photos, those haunting pictures of the melted steel. But what was that like? And was there confusion once we even got to those command posts? Like, how do you even approach something like that?
Yeah, no, that's all great points. You go into work mode, when you're, as a first responder, you're trained to do your job, and trying to not be emotional about it so it doesn't affect your decision making, so you can, accomplish the mission. And that's what we all did. Look, we weren't educated on really the emotional toll that took on everybody down there, even a civilian populace that lived in the neighborhood. And it still has lasting effects 23 years later now. But once you're in work mode, we did our best to, start gathering evidence. We started the bucket brigades, they called. So it'd be firemen, EMS people, us and special operations lined up, and they'd fill plastic buckets like you would get at Home Depot. And there'd be hundreds of these buckets. We'd be filling up and through hundreds of people out to a big pile on a street. So an excavator can pick it up and then sift through it. That we did that for the first several weeks until, structurally it got all organized for evidence collection. On top of that, there's something that I don't see publicized really at all these past 20 some years. Is the first week we had dozens of stampedes from that first responders were in, and I'll explain this. And this was when the first time I really saw terror in first responders' eyes. Is the first day I heard a big horn going off, three pulls of like a big tractor trailer horn, and I was like, what the heck is that? So I looked out on the pile, from the pile down the street, and I saw a bunch of people running down the street. And then I hear the other building's going to collapse. The other building's going to collapse. And we're like, oh my God. So, we kind of were figuring out that when the towers fell, it created, structural damage to the periphery buildings too. So they were at risk. So basically there was actually a crane there, and that was what was beeping the horn, was this crane. And by the way, they got this crane there so quick. I don't even know where this crane was, but for them to get a crane there within hours of a collapse is amazing in itself. But so then we'd see, people down the street, come on, the other building's going to collapse. So I'm looking up at the other buildings with my teammates. I'm like, holy cow, we got to get the hell out of here. So we start running down the street. I think it was West Street. And this is where I really saw, I saw terror. I saw this one heavy set NYPD cop running down, and he turns around facing probably 100 rescue workers running down the street towards him. He goes, everybody calm down, slow down. He got ran over like a stampede of cows. And he was all bloodied up. So we all just kept running, and communications was down. And this was the beginning of people starting to carry cell phones as well. So there was no smartphones. So some people had cell phones, some people didn't. So a lot of the teams lost track of their people, and it took hours for everybody to kind of find out where everybody was. So we had to come up with really old school military tactics of setting up rally points. So that means like there's a designated section, safe zone, that, if we get split up, we know that's where we're going to meet, and once everybody arrives there, then you leave as a team and you go back on the pile. So we had to use that rally point probably 5-6 times. So those stampedes went on for about the first week, probably twice a day. There was engineers finally came out a couple days later saying, yeah, we're trying, they're putting like devices on the buildings to try to figure out if they were actually damaged. Mm-hmm. Luckily, none were damaged enough to where they were going to fall and all that. And I never really heard any more about it, but I wanted that to be known that that type of stuff in these, collapses, these earthquakes, structural damage things happens. Like you would never think, even me as a first responder, I'd never think that I'd be running in a stampede with a bunch of firemen, cops, and EMS workers and all that. So
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And I think that just brings in the human element of it all. And I think you guys being there, I mean, it sounds like it was so professional and stoic. And even though you were having these like haunting, these harrowing moments, you were still there doing your job. And I think like what you just highlighted is that human element, the fear of, you're standing in this pile now, you've seen what happens, what it looks like when it falls, and to hear that horn going off, I'm sure it was so triggering just to be like, oh, you're humans first and then first responders. And I think so often it's the other way because you've been trained to put self second. And I think that little snippet you gave just shows, just you guys were people too. And also, I mean, we kind of glazed over this. You're a New Yorker. You're from New York. You've worked your entire career in New York. And so I'm sure for you that carried extra weight. And we didn't really talk about what you saw when you saw the first plane hit me. You mentioned, we were all kind of like, what was that? Was that an accident? And then when the second fell, but were you at work before you guys realized? Okay, did you see it on TV or how were you getting that information?
I actually saw it on TV at a car place. I was having my troop car maintenance, the oil changed, and I was sitting in the lobby, and the news was on, and that's when I found out. And then my beeper, when we had beepers, my beeper went off after the second plane hit, and I saw like, oh, I know. Yeah, and everybody started calling in and all that, and we all rallied just north of New York City, and then went down together as a team.
I mean, what was that car ride like?
You go into rescue mode and the mode of wanting to help people. So it was a very focused and I guess motivated ride to get down there and help as many people as possible. We were angry, but we were ready to give our A game, and we did give the A game. So, it wasn't like emotional or wasn't scary. It was just like, we're going down here. We're going to risk it all, and we're getting people out of here alive.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine that. And you're talking about like the dust. I think that is hard to even imagine too. Like I remember I was seeing those pictures of the plume that stayed like that for days, weeks probably, and just the amount of dust and debris down there. And like I said, I just keep thinking of the confusion, and you bring up a great point about not having smartphones. And it's like, oh yeah, this is 2001. I don't know how you guys were even like communicating with each other, and you can't see anything. And like, how did you find water? And like, did you have to stop and eat? Like, what were those experiences like?
That's all great points. And luckily they had some water at the command post. But food, like, you had to kind of scrounge the first 2 days, and then there was assets that came in, FEMA, they set up tents. So it wasn't too terribly long where we had to wait. Now, there was a nice little sanctuary we had with St. Paul's Church, which is right next door. Small little church that did not get hit by the debris, God willing. And we used to go in there and take breaks, and they had all the restaurants would supply food, on them for months. So they would have all the chafing dishes lined up, and we'd go there, and then resources would come in when it came to cold weather jackets, flashlights, extra clothing. We'd rip our pants a lot. Just imagine crawling around in debris like that, especially a lot of sharp beams. You wear through your stuff, especially boots too. So a lot of these charitable organizations started to ship that stuff in, and it would, go to St. Paul's Church and some other locations close to Ground Zero.
Yeah. So you guys at least had the basics. Did you stay down there or did you leave, come back? I mean, and where was all this dust going? Like, how did you manage that?
We were unable to wash our clothes for the first 7 days. So I developed in my inner arm here on the opposite side of my elbow and the back of my knees, like sweat spots when you're in uniform, rashes. Guys on the team were getting rashes because that dust was impregnating into your skin, and there's glass particles. It's just chemicals. You would who the heck knows was in all that. But we ended up staying in a hotel just outside the city because it just was easier. And then in the morning we drive in over the George Washington Bridge. And then ultimately, once things settled down after a few weeks, we contracted with a very cool facility, just an IBM conference center, actually, where they would store their lodge their employees. We ended up renting that place for 7 months, so we kind of lived there. It's right over the George Washington Bridge, so it was actually a great little sanctuary at night or in the morning if you work midnights, but to kind of get away, but you're close enough if you got recalled to go back in to kind of get your wits about you, get a workout in, do some laundry. They had a washroom and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mental health aspect too had to have been impacting you guys, but you probably weren't able to really sit in the weight and the heaviness of what you were experiencing. Did you and your colleagues, were you able to talk when you would go back to the hotel, or were you guys just trying to stay super focused on what you were doing? Like, what was that like as you were coming back off the pile and kind of having some of that downtime, if you could even call it that?
Yeah, it wasn't a real somber. You're even for months we were in adrenaline mode for the reality of what we're involved in and what we're trying to do, and we started doing sensitive security assignments down there as well. Some executive protection for the governor, the president on top of it. So you'd literally work the pile one day and get pulled to go on a presidential visit with the governor, and you're walking around with them around the pile, providing support to the Secret Service, and then you're back on the pile the next day. So there was a lot of moving parts. One story I do want to bring up to kind of expose of all the confusion is we have a very large aviation wing, the 19 helicopters, a bunch of fixed wings for the whole state. And one of our really good pilots was flying down to the city to do a recce. And I can't recall if my team was on that or not, that actual aircraft, but there was, state police personnel on the aircraft. Well, they were squawking the wrong frequency. I guess some transmitter that air traffic control recognizes their state police. I guess they weren't transponding the proper one. So an F-15 buzzed them because they thought the F-15 thought it was an actual threat. So here's, this badass state police pilot flying towards New York City, and this F-16 freaking rocks the helicopter. And then they finally talk to each other and like, hey, we're state police. So just, the confusion all the way up to the jet fighters and then the state police pilots. I mean, there's a lot of deconfliction in those types of scenarios.
I would pee my pants, to put that mild. I could not imagine that. That had to have been so horrifying. Is that what they do? They're just like a little warning, just like a really close breath fly?
Yeah. And for them to actually identify what this aircraft was. Yeah.
Man. Yeah, I would not. If I were the pilot, I would not forget that.
Yeah.
I run in with the F-15 or F-16, whatever it was. So how much time did you spend from the moment you guys first crossed the George Washington and the moment you last left? How long was that time frame?
7.5 months.
7.5 months you were there.
We would go home 2 days a week, which was nice. So we started the rotation. But yeah, we were down there 5 days a week for 7.5 months. And we still had operations around the state. Now they slowed down. It's like all the criminals didn't want to be criminals for like 7 months. But there was a time where we got flown out of New York City to do a raid in upstate New York on some bad guys. And then we flew back down. We're on the pile the same day. Crazy.
That is crazy. I do wonder if like that decrease in crime, I mean, you're sort of saying that jokingly, but I wonder if we were all just, shell shocked of what we were going through.
Yeah, it is interesting because I would always think, I'm like, we were so busy chasing bad guys and there was no request for us for pretty much 7 months. Maybe 5 times we got called out in 7 months, where usually it's 4 or 5 times a week. So it was an interesting, the whole country was in shock.
Yeah, it was. I mean, and we would love to have you back on the Lasting Mission podcast to talk about your health and how that continued to impact you post 9/11. But if you can just share briefly now, when did you first start realizing, I'm getting something from this like dust and debris, and were other people on your team also experiencing some of those similar things? I mean, you guys had to have just been coughing while you were down there. It's just like you said, you're not wearing masks. It's so thick.
Yeah, we all started to kind of get coughs while we were down there. And then it was about a year after I started coughing up phlegm I never saw before. I was getting 6 sinus infections a year as years passed, and I never would get these amount of sinus infections. So, I was constantly on antibiotics. And then people started dying, colleagues, and you'd see it within the first responder community and civilians, that lived in that area. Cancers, lung diseases, brain, cancers and all that. For me personally, it was 15 years later when it really hit me. I went on a 3-mile run, which was typically very easy for me. I'm a fitness fanatic, and I had a hard time running 3 miles and had shortness of breath. I chalked it off to maybe fighting something off. I did it the next day, felt the same, went to my personal doctor, and I just felt ill beyond shortness of breath. I just didn't feel right. So he had given me the multitude of generic medical tests to try to hone in on what's going on. Blood test, and then prescribed a CAT scan for me because he felt maybe it was my heart. So I go get the CAT scan. They read it, and my heart's great. But on the periphery of the CAT scan, they found lung nodules in my lungs, and I was freaked out. I've never smoked. I'm the epitome of health. And I knew then, I'm like, that's 9/11. Because we've already lost people in the state police and the fire departments and the NYPD, multitude of people. And it put me to my knees. I I didn't think I would have a kink in the armor, being in special operations and kind of living the dream with that. Like, it was a really cool job, dangerous, but if you did, for being in that career, we saw it all. Briefly discuss my journey of being your own self advocate with this is I went to a local hospital, got a CAT scan there from a pulmonologist, and the pulmonologist was like, I don't think it's that bad. I think it might be a fungal thing from when you guys go hit these farmhouses with the bad guys. There's a lot of fungal and bird poop and all this, and it affects your lungs. So I just knew, I'm like, dude, like, I spent 7.5 months on 9/11. Look at all the people that already died, and you're talking about a fungus? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, I got to go down to New York City. So I found the top pulmonologist in New York City down at Weill Cornell, which is the top hospital in New York City, in my opinion. I get down there. They give me their CAT scan. And the pulmonologist is like, Ron, we got to get you in surgery like yesterday. You definitely got a lung disease. We think you got lymphoma cancer. And this is not good. And this is definitely related to 9/11. So I think within a week I was in surgery where they had to take tissue samples out of me to find out what the heck's going on. Mm-hmm. And to see if I actually do have lymphoma. They went in through my throat. It felt like they put 2 rats down there, and the rats bit the inside of my lungs 50 times. They took 40 tissue samples. So that hurt pretty bad for about a week, and I was spitting up ugly stuff. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, they validated the lung disease, but they couldn't determine whether I had lymphoma or not. They didn't get enough tissue. So they had to give me a full-blown lung surgery shortly thereafter, going through the side of my chest. They took a quarter of my right lung out, took all my lymph nodes out, which were popping hot on a PET scan for cancer. Ultimately, they ruled out cancer while I was still under, thank God. Yeah. But they were like, we've never seen a lung disease this severe ever. And it's definitely from 9/11. This the irritation was the worst they've ever seen. So, and they're like, we just don't know your prognosis. We don't know how long you're going to live. What will this turn into lymphoma? And we can't guarantee that we didn't find, you may have cancer. We didn't find it. Mm-hmm. So, that's a lot to take on, emotionally, especially, in a career that I loved, and we could talk about this in other podcasts, but it becomes your identity, those types of jobs, because the exhilaration of it, when you start helping people, you start saving lives, it's exhilarating. There's some juice behind that, and it's addictive, and the camaraderie, there's nothing like being on a tight team like that. So I had to make a decision to stay or retire, because I didn't know how long I was going to live. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, I made that tough decision to retire. Yeah. And I would have still, to this day, been on that team to this day.
Yeah. I know that had to have been just so bittersweet for you is probably not even the right word, but such a difficult decision. And at that point, like you had said, you'd been operating at the tip of the sphere, and, you hadn't missed a beat. And so to be knocked off your feet like that by something that was out of your control, and also something that was a direct correlation to your rescue efforts and your work at the pilot, it just had to have been so hard. And were you able to chat with like other team members who are going through similar things? And were you guys able to share some of those resources and experiences before it became more nationally known? Because it took a while. If people remember, it took a long time for the United States, really, their citizens and like our government, to recognize that there was this other impact of that day, health-wise.
Yeah, well, I mean, we would informally talk, but it wasn't like you would actually think. you're just in go mode all the time because, once 9/11 ended, we were on to the next, chasing the next bad guy type thing. So there wasn't there wasn't a lot of time to actually digest, or we weren't taught or guided to actually set some side, to take some time to do that, because we don't know what we don't know. And the educational part of this and dealing with scenarios like this are extremely important. I think we as a nation are, in regards to law enforcement, first responders, and the military, are a lot better now because of the 20-year war, 9/11. We've learned a lot. But then you just sucked it up. It's kind of old school. You just grind through it. And there wasn't a lot of any of that, chatting about it.
Yeah. I mean, that holds, right? Do you remember the next time you went back, or have you been back? Did you visit the memorial? Did you go back to the site? Can you tell me about that?
The first time I went back there, I didn't go back for 20 years. Yeah. I mean, we had some assignments down in the city where I'd drive by it and all that, but I never actually went and walked around and kind of, took a breath and thought about things. I just couldn't do it. It was too hard, to be honest. To be totally, it was just emotionally too hard to go down there. And then finally, I went down 2 years ago, so that was 21 years later. And I went down with my son, and I'm like, son, I want to take you down here. And we took the train down. It's a 2-hour train ride from me. And we walked around and I explained stuff. And then I've been there a couple times since.
Yeah, that just had to have been unbelievable going back, and to go back with your son. Was it your son that served?
No, my son that's in college. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sure that was tough for them too. I mean, they knew you were down there at the pile during that time, and the danger that you were in. I mean, I'm sure they were used to that, and to some extent with your career and some of the more dangerous experiences you were a part of. But that had to have been really difficult for him too, to go down there and to think about his dad, and knowing that you had the health impact as well was probably really tough.
Yeah. One thing I want to say is that pile was extremely dangerous. I'll give you a scenario that I was in that I got very lucky at. And I bring this up to, kind of show not just about me almost getting killed this one day. It's about the thousands of others that were on there that almost got killed multiple times trying to, do their job in picking up the evidence and all that. I was it was the pit now. So the pile was so high, like I actually looked up at it and I was like, it's going to take a minimum a year to get this ground level. It was just so high and so complicated with beams sticking out. And I was like, where do you even start? So they kicked butt and got that thing level by November. I was actually so impressed. And then it started to go below the earth, and we would call it the pit. So it started to become the pit. I think it was a Saturday I was down there, and there was me and a partner, and then there was a couple construction workers, and then we're working in front of this grappler. So it's a machine that kind of grabs the pipes and beams, picks them up, and moves them over to like a dump truck, and then they take it off over to Fresh Kills to be evaluated or whatever they did with the steel. So this grappler was picking steel up and moving it. And then there was a pipe probably, I don't know, a foot wide in circumference, like this big, where the grappler grabbed. And I'll give you an example. Like when you get a new piece of clothing to tag, if you get a scissors and you click, you cut the plastic, the inertia of the snap pops both ends and they fly. That's what happened to this pipe. When the grappler grabbed the pipe, it split and an inertia happened. And it probably was a 6-foot piece of 24-inch pipe flying through the air. It flew right towards me, and I'm standing there and just kind of looking, and I misjudged how close this thing was going to be at me. And it literally swung inches. I felt the breeze by my ear. My partner's standing right next to me, and he looks over at me and he goes, "Ron, did you see what just happened?" And I go, "Yeah." And I didn't realize it until, actually, that was our last day there. We drove home after that shift. On the drive home, like, I really, almost felt like I was having a panic attack of, like, subconsciously I realized how close I was to dying. That would have, like, pretty much decapitated me. But that would happen all the time with all the machinery and all that. The other point I want to bring across is 9/11 is the longest standing acting terrorist event in history. It's still killing. It's still, their event is still working. It's killing. Every day there's a 9/11 responder or civilian that was in that area that dies from the health effects of 9/11. We have now surpassed the amount of deaths on that day to medical, to deaths afterwards. We've now surpassed that number.
Well, I don't think I knew that it was that bad.
Yep.
I mean, that had to have been, you also were an Army veteran. You have a child that serves on active duty. And I think that experience too, combined with you being a first responder, knowing that we were going to war, none of us could have imagined it would be a 20-year war. And like you said, this ongoing event that we wish had never happened. But there was the resiliency and the strength that I think Americans showed, that they continue to show. And I think that's what's on display if people are fortunate enough to be able to visit the memorial or go to New York City or to Pennsylvania or to the Pentagon, or just to even sit back and think about that day and where we were, and to honor and remember all those that were impacted and continue to be impacted. I think that's our duty, is to never forget. And that's why we're so thankful to hear this experience. I wish this experience hadn't happened. I wish this experience hadn't happened to you, and that you didn't have these continued effects of this. But I think it's our responsibility to look at the cold, hard facts of what happened that day and in the days after, and to never forget. And that's our responsibility, to remember all those that were impacted and are continue to be impacted.
Totally agree, Britt.
Well, I thank you so much. I mean, is there anything you wanted to share that we didn't get to cover about your experiences, or memories that you had, or stories, or anything you would want someone watching this to know about you or those you served with?
I just want to kind of get across that that event and others in American history are deeper than people really realize when it comes to the emotional and physical effects it causes, not only for the folks that are actually in the environment, but their family members. It affects your marriages. It affects your children, their performance at school. So the trickle down effect of these events are absolutely immense, beyond just people's understanding. And the other thing too is, I think that we can all get better, especially on the first responder side and the VA, on using more holistic, cutting edge techniques at treating our veterans and first responders.
Yeah. And I think that's something we'll be excited to hear your perspective on and dive in. And like I said, we'd love to have you back for a future episode of The Lasting Mission. And I know I speak for all of us at Mission Roll Call when I say we just thank you so much for your service to your country, and both as a veteran and as a first responder, and your efforts surrounding 9/11 and beyond. And we're just really excited to have you on again in the future. So thank you so much for joining us and for being so open and vulnerable and sharing your experiences about that day and the days after.
Thank you, Britt. My pleasure.